Hi, this is Simon Obstell, and welcome to this second part of this tutorial in which we're looking at creating a lighthouse in Blender and Apple Motion. So the first thing we're going to do is to create the beams that come out of the lamps. And to do that, I've made you a completely matte black version of the entire structure. And you'll be able to find that Blender project in the Assets folder, and it will be called Lighthouse Beams. So I've made an empty collection down at the bottom, and into that I'm going to add mesh and cylinder. So I want 24 vertices, a radius of 2 meters, a depth of 4. I'm going to come down and rotate it through 90 degrees on Y. I also want to move it 5 meters on X. And I'm going to set the origin to the 3D cursor. So right click, set origin to 3D cursor. So then Control A in the viewport to bake all transforms. Let's zoom in a bit. Switch to edit mode and make sure the transparency is turned on there, and we've got vertices selected. Select these vertices, and then I'm going to hit S and 4 and enter to scale them up. Zoom out a little bit, and with them still selected, I'm going to hit G and X and 200 and enter to scale them out to this extreme length. And still in edit mode, I want to select faces, and I want to select this face here and delete it, and then come around and delete that other face at the other end there, and switch back to object mode. Then I'm going to come over to shading and create a new material, and I'm going to call this beams. I want to add an image texture, and I'm going to browse to this gradient texture, and I'm going to pipe its color into the base color as a temporary measure, and I'm also going to pipe that color into the alpha. Let's turn the roughness all the way up and the specular all the way down. So now you can see we've got this gradient applied along the length of our beam. So there's a little bit of an issue here with the texture, and we're seeing a little bit of white on the end there. So I'm going to come into UV editing, select one face, A to select them all. And if we zoom out here, you can see we've got a little bit of an issue with the way this has been mapped. So I'm going to switch to vertex mode, select this row of vertices here, make sure I'm in move mode, and I'm just going to move them down, not quite to the edge, a little bit off the edge there. And I'm going to select that top row of vertices and move them away from that edge, because that was giving us that white on the end of the beam. And now if we switch out, we can see that that's sorted out that problem, and we've got a more even spread of that texture all the way across the beam. So switch back to object mode and make sure all our transforms don't need baking. That's all good. So what I can now do is create an array, add modifier array, turn off relative offset, turn on object offset, and select our empty, which is still there, count of 4. And you'll notice that the empty has got a rotation, Z rotation of 90 degrees, and that's giving us that array of 4 beams that we want. And then Control A on the array to bake it. So let's come over to shading, and I want to disconnect that base color because I don't actually want that. Now we can't see the transparency, not terribly important, but if we come down to the materials and we look for the settings down here, the blend mode, we'll switch that to alpha hashed, just allows us to see that transparency in Blender. Doesn't actually affect the output. So now we can export this as a GLTF, Lighthouse Beams. Export that, can come into Reality Converter and import it, and it looks like this. And from there we can export the USDZ for motion. But for convenience, I'm going to be giving you the USDZ, both of this beams model and of the original Lighthouse model. And the advantage of using the original Lighthouse model that I'm going to give you is that it's going to be fully textured. So here we are in motion. Let's look at our project setup, 1920 1080, 24 frames a second, a duration of 359 frames. That's quite important. So I'm going to import the Lighthouse beams and the Lighthouse master. I'll give you a link to download both of those. So we need the beams to sit above the master, like so. And then we need to scale them up because they're a different size. And that's a function of what happens in Reality Converter. So we need to scale up the beams until we can see that the scale is matching the main Lighthouse master. So 735 looks about right. And I'm going to switch the blend mode now to add. And you can see how that's kind of working. I'm also going to add a color levels. And I just want to crunch the black a little bit so I don't see that black being added. It doesn't matter too much, but just for perfectionism's sake. And so now we've got this. And what I'm going to do is add a blur, Gaussian blur. And I'm going to set the amount to 64. And then I'm also going to come to the rotation, Y rotation, add parameter behavior ramp. And I'm going to set the end value to 360. And now we've got our beams swinging round in time with our lights. And I also want to switch this group to 3D. And I want to add a camera. And just going to scale up that group to 300%. And I'm going to come to my camera and set an X rotation of something like 11 degrees for now. And then I want to select one of the 3D objects and adjust its environment lighting. And I'm going to go for something like 5% because I really want to be mostly using my own lighting for this and just a little bit of ambient from the environment. So then let's add a light. And I'm going to make this a directional light. Come over to its rotation, and I'm going to rotate it through 90 degrees on Y. And I'm going to reduce that intensity to 5%. Then I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to set that Y rotation to -90. And I'm just going to increase the intensity of this one to 10%. So this is like the key light, and the other is the fill. Next, I want to make a new 3D group, and I want to add another light. And this one wants to be a spotlight. I'm going to set the cone angle to 30 degrees and the soft edge to 10 degrees. And then I'm going to come to position. And I also want to just switch to the top view. And let's zoom in on our roof here. Just going to turn off those other lights so they don't confuse us in the viewport. So now you can see that spotlight pointing that direction. I'm going to move it out on Z to 145. And then I'm going to duplicate it. Right-click, duplicate, come to properties, set that Z position to -145. And obviously I now need to rotate it on Y to 180 degrees. So it's pointing in again. Duplicate it again, right-click, duplicate, come over, set the Z position to 0 and the X position to -145. And that Y rotation this time needs to be 270. And then we can duplicate this light one more time. Right-click, duplicate, come over to properties, X position 145, and Y rotation 90. So those four lights are pointing in towards our scene, and they give us this really nice effect like this. And I'm just going to pop all those four lights into that 3D group we made there. And you see I've renamed it spots. And then I'm going to add parameter behavior ramp to the Y rotation and set that end value to 360. So this is the entire group being rotated around. And so those lights are all following along exactly as they ought to be doing. And here it is with those directional lights turned back on as well. And I just wanted to jump in and show you the detail of the difference these lights actually make. So if I turn that off, you can see how dull and lifeless this 3D model actually looks. But these lights suddenly bring everything to life. And if I come in even closer on the camera, hopefully we'll be able to see how it's affecting the glass, and everything is just looking so much better because of those lights. Now, you might be thinking there's more we can get out of these beams. And one of the things we can do is to take that second light there, the one that's the key light, and rotate it through 60 degrees on X. And you can see how that's now rather nicely given us sort of this underlight. And we can also come down to that levels on the beams and crunch the whites like that. And now let's talk camera animation. So I'm going to come back to my camera, 15 degrees on X, and let's move it out to what we think is a nice starting position. Let's go for maybe something like that. Entirely up to you, really. I think it's quite nice to be a little bit off to the side like that. And then let's add behavior's basic motion throw to get our animation. Come to the last frame. Let's switch to ramp to final value, open up the controls, and let's scroll on the Z till we're kind of level with the main column, and scroll up on the Y till we're kind of there. So this is really to taste. I think that's probably somewhere around the place that I want to be. So the animation is kind of progressing like that. I think that's pretty good. So next, let's import our background. Now this is an image from pexels.com. So I need to move it out to a group behind everything else. Come over and turn off the lighting because we don't want this to be lit by the lights in the scene. I'm going to set that Z position to negative 10,000 and it's disappeared. That's because we need to reset the camera's far plane to something like 20,000. Make sure it's in view. So now I can come back to this group and scale it up till it's filling the frame. Make sure we're on the first frame of the sequence as we're doing this. Something like that on Y. And let's increase that scale. Let's go for something like 300%. That should be safe. So then I'm going to select the layer, come to Color, Hue Saturation, and reduce that saturation down to negative 0.5. So it's a pretty picture, but it's too colourful for us. And add a Color Levels. And just bring that levels down quite a bit so we're nice and moody, something like this. And then I'm going to make a clone of it. So right click, make clone layer, just off the bottom of the frame there. And then I'm going to set the blend mode to add. And I'm going to come and add another color hue saturation and another color levels. Everything's in the wrong order. The hue saturation wants to be above. So the levels, I'm going to bring in the blacks. So the background is pretty much invisible apart from the bright bits. And then bring up those whites a lot because these are going to be the lit up clouds. And it's going to look something like that. And let's just reduce the craziness of those colors down. Let's go for something like negative 0.6 on the saturation. So then what I'm going to do is add to that opacity of this layer a randomize. And I'm going to set the apply mode to subtract and the amount to 400%. And now you'll see we've got this lightning in the background. But we also ought to be seeing the flashing on the structure of the lighthouse. So to do that, we're going to add another light. Our object light. Again, we're going to use a directional and come over and adjust its rotation. So the Y rotation, just so we're getting that edge there. This is nice little backlight. So we're 135, negative 135 on the Y rotation there. And I might just give it a little bit of color, not too much. You don't want to overdo these colors of these lights. I think something like that just beds it in a bit better. And maybe just reduce it down to like 20%. So it's not too crazy. Yes, I think that's going to be about right. And then I'm going to link that intensity, add parameter behavior link, to that randomize. So add that clone layer and as the source parameter set properties, blending opacity. And now if we press play, every time our background flashes, our lighthouse is illuminated by the flashes. It really helps to bring the whole thing together, I think. So I've tidied up the naming of those lights: backlight, key light, fill light. Now, assuming we're happy with where we've got to so far, and I think we are, now is a good time to render this scene out so that we can composite the mist and the rain in a new project. We could try and do it all in the same project, but things will really start to bog down, and it's always best to do those kind of final touches when you're not struggling against performance issues, because you can make better creative decisions, I think. So let's come to the Share menu, Export Movie. Let's call this Light Intermediate, and let's press Save. So from the Motion Startup page, let's click on Import as Project and select what we just rendered. And that'll make sure it has all the same properties. So then let's first of all look at adding some mist. So I'm going to make a new group, Object New Group, and I'm going to use, unsurprisingly, clouds for this. So bring that in, and I'm going to set the blend mode of this to add. And I'm going to reduce that opacity down to 10%. We'll be reducing it even more as we go along, but that's good enough for now. So I'm going to come over to the Generate Controls, and I'm going to set the horizontal and vertical scale to 64. So this is going to be like the foreground layer of mist. So then I'm going to come to the offset here, and to the X offset, I'm going to add parameter behavior ramp. I need to get my numbers right here. I think what I want is an end value of -1. That's right, I've got it right, which gives us a drift from left to right. So as I say, that's going to be our foreground layer. And I'm going to have 2 extra layers. So I'm going to duplicate this. And for this next layer, I'm going to reduce that scale back down to 32 and come over to the behavior. I'm going to reduce that speed down to 0.6. It's farther away, so it'll go slower. And then we're just going to do that one more time. Right-click, duplicate. Let's reduce that scale down to 16 and 16, and the behavior's -0.3. So that's the mist. It's all much too much. So we can select this group, and we can just reduce its opacity down to something like 20%. That might still be too much, but let's leave it there for now. And then what we can do is add some rain. So I'm just going to do this a very simple way. I'm going to come over to the library, select particle emitters. I'm going to click on the search there and type the word rain. I'm going to select the emitter called rain streaks and drag it out into a new group here. You'll notice it's not long enough, so I'm going to come to the end of the project and hit O on the keyboard, and now it is long enough. So let's come into the inspector. Let's first of all set up the width and height. So I want 2000 for the width and 1100 for the height, and I want a speed of 200. And what we'll be doing is we'll be cranking up the birth rate, so I will go for something like 7500. It's going to be a bit like that, but I'm going to reduce that down to, say, 4000 for the time being, just so it's not slowing us down. And one of the things I want to do is I want to add to the emission angle a wriggle behavior. So add parameter behavior wriggle. And the point of this is to create the effect of wind turbulence. So I can do that by just reducing that wriggle amount to something like 15. Apply mode of add is good because that's going to push it off to the right. So you can probably see how that's working. The nice thing about this particular particle emitter is they've added an align to motion so that the rain particles actually do follow the direction quite well. And then when we actually come to render it, we're going to turn on motion blur, which is obviously going to give us much longer streaks, but they are too long. And what we're going to do is Command J. We're going to come over and we're going to reduce that shutter angle down to something like 120. And I think that's going to be better. And the only other thing I want to do is with the emitter, let's reset its position, and I want to increase that Y position to 250. So it's coming down more from the top of the frame like that. So I'm not yet convinced by the photorealism of this scene. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to close up some of these groups. I'm going to make these two groups here 3D, the ones with the rain and the mist. but not this background group with my action in it. And then I'm going to add a light. And you can immediately see how that has improved things. So we've now got these atmospheric effects being illuminated rather than just sort of sitting over the entire shot. So what we probably want to do is like animate that light so it stays on the lighthouse. So let's come to the first frame. First of all, I'm just going to move it out 200 on Z, and then I'm going to keyframe X and Y, and let's just drag it over the light like that. And on our last frame, let's move it over. This is probably overkill, but might as well just sort of track the lighthouse. Probably find you need to kind of do a little bit of an adjustment in the middle. Not terribly important, but might be worth doing. So the other thing that's not quite looking right now is the rain, and that's because we need to come to the rain group, this one here. And I think what we need to do is change its blend mode to add. And I don't know, I'm going to have to zoom in for you to be able to see this. So the difference between normal, you can see it here. These have gone grey where they're passing over the beam. If we switch to add, you can see they're now still looking like raindrops. So as I say, the final thing to do before rendering would be to come into the rain streaks and crank up the birth rate as high as you dare. So we really want this to be a ferocious rainstorm. And the other thing we might do is just knock back the opacity of this rain a little bit. So let's go for something like 50%. And I think that's a little bit more subtle and works better. So there you go, that's the project complete. I hope that's been interesting, lots of steps to it, but overall I think we've built a pretty interesting scene. So thanks very much indeed for watching, and I hope to see you again another time.